When I look back now, I realize the day everything changed was not some grand event. No thunderstorm, no shouting in the streets, just a quiet morning filled with the smell of tea and the hum of family chatter. My name is Margaret, and for most of my life I believed I had raised my son with love, patience, and all the lessons that would make him a good man. He was my pride, my reason, the one I sacrificed everything for. After my husband passed away years ago, it was just the two of us, mother and son, sharing a small but warm home filled with laughter and comfort. When he told me he was getting married, I was truly happy for him. I wanted him to have a partner, a family, someone who would care for him the way I always had. I imagined a daughter-in-law who would become another daughter to me, someone who would walk beside us, not in front, not behind, but beside. Her name was Claire, and when I first met her, I remember thinking how lovely she looked, how her smile seemed so gentle and her words so soft. But life has a strange way of showing you truths too slowly, like turning the pages of a book you wish you could close but cannot. The wedding was beautiful, and I remember standing in the crowd watching my son, feeling tears in my eyes, not because I was sad, but because I was proud. He had built a life, and I felt my heart finally rest. After they moved in together, I decided to give them space, visiting only occasionally, always calling first. Months passed, and I thought they were happy. But then came the day my son asked me to move in with them, saying he wanted me close since I was getting older and he worried about me being alone. I hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but his insistence melted me. He promised that Claire would be fine with it, that she had agreed. I believed him. That was my first mistake. The first week I moved into their house, everything seemed fine. Claire smiled, offered tea, asked about my health, and called me Mom. But something felt ... off. Small things. The way her eyes shifted when I spoke, the way she would whisper to my son when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she would rearrange things in the kitchen after I touched them. I told myself I was just being sensitive, that adjusting takes time. But deep down, a quiet unease started to grow. One morning, I woke up early, as I always do, to prepare breakfast. Old habits never leave you, and I thought it would be nice to surprise them. The sun was barely up and the kitchen was peaceful. I made pancakes and tea. When Claire walked in, she froze for a moment, her expression tightening before she smiled. "Oh, you didn't have to, Mom," she said, but her voice sounded forced, almost like she was scolding herself for being caught off guard. I brushed it off. Later that day, when my son came home, I noticed Claire pulling him aside, speaking in hushed tones. That night, he came to me looking uncomfortable. "Mom," he said softly, "maybe you can let Claire handle the kitchen. She feels uncomfortable when you cook. It's her space, you know?" I smiled and nodded, though my chest felt heavy. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. But when I lay in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how my small act of love had turned into something unwelcome. The next morning, I waited for Claire to wake up before entering the kitchen. She didn't speak much, just moved around quickly, her slippers slapping against the tiles. I offered to help, but she said no. I stood quietly, watching her work, and for the first time, I saw something in her face I hadn't seen before: resentment. Pure, unguarded resentment. I couldn't understand why. All I wanted was peace, family, warmth. But every word, every action seemed to irritate her. A few days later, my son was away for work, and it was just the two of us in the house. I thought perhaps we could finally talk woman to woman, maybe clear whatever invisible wall stood between us. I made tea and invited her to sit. She did reluctantly. I smiled and said, "Claire, I know moving in together isn't always easy. I just want you to feel comfortable." "If there's anything I can do," she interrupted me sharply. "There is," she said coldly. "You can stop acting like this is your house." I blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" I asked softly. She leaned forward, her tone sharp. "You walk around like you own this place. You rearrange things. You touch things that aren't yours. I don't need another mother here. I already have one." I stared at her, words caught in my throat. "I never meant to." "Then stop," she said, standing up and taking her cup to the sink. "Just stop trying to be in control. This isn't your home anymore." Her words cut deeper than she could ever know. I sat there, frozen, my hands trembling slightly. After she left, I sat in silence, staring at the half-empty cup of tea between us, the faint steam fading away just like my place in this family. When my son returned that evening, I didn't tell him. I couldn't. I didn't want to create tension. But Claire's behavior only worsened. She began ignoring me entirely, moving things I used, locking cabinets, leaving me out of family dinners, and pretending it was all a misunderstanding when my son was around. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room folding laundry when she came in, looking annoyed. "Could you move?" she said flatly. I looked up confused. "I'm almost done. Just a few more shirts." She crossed her arms. I said, "Move." "That's my chair." "Your chair?" I repeated softly. "Yes," she said, her voice rising. "You don't sit there without permission." I stood slowly, feeling a sting in my eyes but keeping my voice calm. "Of course," I whispered. She smirked slightly, as if she had won some invisible battle, and sat down in that chair. I turned away, my heart breaking a little more each day. Later that evening, when my son came home, I overheard her telling him I was being difficult, that I made her uncomfortable, that I was always complaining. And he believed her. He looked at me differently that night, not with anger, but with doubt, and that hurt even more. For the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own child's world. Days passed, and her cruelty became quieter but sharper. A spoon misplaced would become an argument. A look would become an accusation. I began to stay in my room, avoiding her completely, but even that didn't satisfy her. One night, when my son was away again, I came out to make myself a cup of tea. Claire was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone. I quietly walked to the stove, but as I reached for a cup, she suddenly stood up, her voice cold and cutting. "Didn't you hear me this morning?" she said. "You don't touch my things without asking." I turned to her slowly, unsure what she meant. "Claire, it's just a cup." "No," she snapped. Stepping closer, "It's my cup in my kitchen, in my house." Her voice rose, echoing against the walls. And before I could say another word, she grabbed the cup from my hand and threw it into the sink, the porcelain shattering into tiny pieces. The sound made me flinch. She looked at me with those cold, victorious eyes and whispered, "Next time, remember your place." I stood there in silence, my hands trembling, my heart pounding. That was the night I realized this wasn't just dislike. It was war. Quiet, cruel, invisible war. The morning after that horrible night, I woke up with a heaviness that words can hardly describe. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the faint sunlight creeping through the curtains, and wondered how something so bright could touch a world that felt so cold. I kept thinking about what she had said, about how she called it her house, her kitchen, her things, as if I was nothing more than a guest, an intruder in the life I helped build for my son. My chest ached with a kind of pain I hadn't known before, a quiet, suffocating ache that doesn't come from anger but from heartbreak. I didn't know what to do, whether to confront her or stay silent. Every instinct in me said to protect my son, to not let my pain create cracks in his marriage, but at the same time, a voice deep inside whispered that I was slowly disappearing, piece by piece. The next few days passed in silence. She barely spoke to me unless it was to correct something, to remind me of what I shouldn't do, where I shouldn't sit, what I shouldn't touch. She started labeling things in the kitchen, her handwriting sharp and possessive. Claire's drawer, Claire's cups, Claire's spices. It was humiliating. I tried to laugh it off in front of my son, but he only nodded and said she was just organized. Organized, I thought, yes, organized enough to erase me completely. Then came the dinner that changed everything. My son had invited some of his office colleagues for an evening meal. I wanted it to be perfect, to show I still had a place here, that I could contribute something meaningful. I spent the whole afternoon helping prepare the dishes, chopping, setting the table, arranging flowers. Claire didn't stop me this time, which surprised me. She even smiled when I asked if she wanted help plating the food. For a moment, I thought maybe we had turned a corner, maybe kindness still had a chance. But I was wrong. As the guests arrived, laughter filled the house and everything seemed pleasant. I stayed mostly in the background, letting them talk, serving drinks, refilling plates. Then one of the guests, a kind woman, smiled at me and said, "You must be so proud, Mrs. Harding. You raised such a wonderful son and such a lovely family." I smiled warmly and said, "Yes, I am. It's such a joy to see them happy." That was when Claire's smile faltered. I noticed the shift immediately, that tiny flicker of irritation she couldn't hide. She leaned forward and said lightly, "Oh, Margaret just visits sometimes. It's really our home now." The guests laughed politely, not realizing the sting in her words, but I felt it deep in my heart. After dinner, when everyone had left and the dishes were stacked in the sink, she turned to me, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Next time let me handle everything," she said coldly. "You just made things awkward." "I didn't mean to," I whispered, but she was already walking away. I stood there in that empty kitchen, the laughter from earlier echoing faintly in my ears, and felt something inside me harden. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words, her tone, her smirk, and the way my son looked at her, trusting, oblivious. I realized she wasn't just trying to push me out. She was trying to rewrite the entire story of our lives, making me disappear without ever having to say it out loud. The next morning, I woke up with a decision. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I had built. I had to protect my son, even if it meant standing against his wife. I began observing quietly, carefully. I noticed small things, the way she handled his phone when he wasn't around, how she would delete messages, how she would quickly end calls when I entered the room. One afternoon, while my son was at work, I was dusting the living room when her phone rang. She was in the shower, so I picked it up out of instinct to bring it to her. But the name flashing on the screen froze me. Ethan. My heart skipped. I had never heard of an Ethan. The call ended before I could react, and a message appeared. Last night was amazing. Same place tomorrow? I stood there, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't know what to do. My hands trembled as I placed the phone back down exactly where it was and sat in silence, my mind racing. Could it be what I thought it was? I didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth. That evening, when my son came home, she was her usual sweet self, laughing, hugging him, pretending everything was perfect. And I stood there, watching, knowing a secret that could destroy their marriage, a truth that sat like a stone in my chest. Days passed, and I kept quiet, trying to gather proof, unsure how to even begin. Then, one afternoon, fate decided for me. Claire was out, and I was tidying the bedroom when I noticed a small envelope tucked under a drawer. Curiosity pulled at me, and when I opened it, my heart sank completely. Inside were photos, Claire, and a man I had never seen before, smiling, arms wrapped around each other, their faces lit with affection. My stomach turned, and tears blurred my vision. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real. She was betraying my son. I sat on the bed clutching those photos, trembling, torn between anger and heartbreak. How could she do this to him, to us? But as I sat there, I realized something else. If I told my son now, she would twist it. She would make it seem like I was lying, like I was jealous or controlling. I knew how much influence she had over him. I had seen it. No, I couldn't act yet. I had to be smart. I had to gather everything, every piece of truth, and reveal it when she could no longer deny it. That night, when they sat at dinner laughing, I forced myself to smile too, even though inside I was burning with fury. Every laugh she gave felt like a dagger. Every affectionate touch she gave him made me sick. But I stayed quiet, patient, waiting, because I knew that one day the truth would explode, and when it did, she would not be able to hide behind her lies anymore. From that night onward, something inside me shifted completely. I had always been a quiet woman, the kind who avoided confrontation, who believed that patience and kindness could heal anything, but this was different. This was betrayal, not just against my son, but against everything I had built, every value I had raised him with. I started observing her more closely, memorizing her patterns, her habits, the way she smiled into her phone when she thought no one was watching, the way she always left the house on Thursdays claiming she had errands. I began noting times, writing down small details, the names she mentioned, the hours she was gone, the perfume she wore only on those days. My heart ached every time I saw her kiss my son goodbye with that same mouth that whispered lies to another man. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to tell my son everything, but I knew the moment I did, she would twist the truth. She was clever, and she had built an image of herself so perfectly that he saw her as flawless. I needed proof undeniable and visible, something that would expose her in front of him so completely that no words could defend her. The first opportunity came one Friday afternoon when she left her laptop open on the table. Normally she was careful, always locking it, always clearing her messages, but that day she was in a hurry. My heart pounded as I sat before it, my fingers trembling. I knew it was wrong, but my love for my son was stronger than my guilt. I opened the laptop and saw a string of messages between her and that man, Ethan. The words burned into my eyes, words of affection, plans to meet, promises of a future together. And then I saw the pictures, ones I can never erase from my mind, of them together in places she told my son she had gone alone. My body went cold. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff with the wind threatening to push me over. I closed the laptop and sat back, breathing heavily, tears streaming down my face. My mind was spinning with questions. How long had this been going on? Why had she done this? And how could I protect my son without destroying him in the process? That evening she came home glowing, humming softly as she prepared dinner. She looked at me and smiled, pretending nothing had ever happened. I stared at her, and for the first time I felt no fear, no hesitation, only resolve. I knew what I had to do. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, screenshots, printed messages, photographs. I hid them carefully in a small box beneath my dresser. Each night, I prayed for strength, asking for guidance, torn between justice and heartbreak. Then one morning, my son announced that they were planning an anniversary dinner, something intimate and special. The idea made me sick, but I smiled, pretending to be happy. That night, as they planned the menu, I quietly made my own plan. It was time for the truth to surface, but it had to happen in a way that could not be denied. The day of their anniversary came like any other, the house decorated with candles, laughter in the air, music playing softly. She looked radiant, her dress shimmering under the light, her smile painted with deceit. My son, oblivious, held her hand proudly, his eyes full of love and admiration. Watching them together broke something inside me, but it also fueled my determination. When dinner began, I excused myself, went to my room, and returned with a small box in my hand. I placed it gently on the table between them. "What's this, Mom?" my son asked, smiling. "A gift," I said quietly. "For both of you." Claire's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering across her face. "You didn't have to," she said softly, her tone dripping with fake warmth. "Oh, but I wanted to," I replied, my voice steady. "It's something that belongs to both of you." My son reached for the box and opened it. Inside, neatly stacked, were the printed photos and messages. For a moment, he didn't understand what he was looking at. He picked one up, then another, his smile fading, confusion turning into disbelief. Claire's face went pale. "What is this?" he whispered. "Where did this come from?" She stammered, "It's not what it looks like," but he interrupted, his voice shaking. Then tell me, what is it? She opened her mouth, searching for words, but none came. Her face twisted with panic as my son continued flipping through the photos, each one worse than the last. I stood silently, watching his world crumble, feeling the ache of every tear in his voice. Finally, he looked up at her, his expression shattered. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. "How long?" he repeated, louder this time. 2 months, she finally muttered, her voice trembling. "It didn't mean anything, I swear." "Don't," he said sharply, standing up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Don't lie again." I watched him step back, tears glistening in his eyes, and for the first time she looked small, powerless, caught in the web of her own deceit. The air felt still, the music still playing faintly in the background, mocking the chaos that had just erupted. "You destroyed everything," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "You destroyed the one thing I believed in." She tried to reach for him, but he pulled away. Then his eyes turned to me, filled with both pain and gratitude, as if realizing I had saved him from a lifetime of lies. "Mom," he said softly, his voice trembling, "you knew?" I nodded slowly, my throat tight. "I wanted to protect you," I whispered. "But you had to see it for yourself." He said nothing, just stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the woman he thought he knew. Claire began to cry, pleading, apologizing, but her words sounded hollow, meaningless. My son finally turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of that beautifully decorated room surrounded by candles and the evidence of her own betrayal. When the door closed behind him, I looked at her one last time. She met my gaze with fury, not remorse, as if blaming me for revealing what she had done. I didn't say a word. I simply turned and walked away, knowing the truth had finally done what I couldn't set him free. That night, after the truth came out, the house that had once been filled with warmth turned into a place of silence so thick it almost had a sound of its own. My son did not come home until dawn. I sat by the window waiting, the lights of passing cars brushing across my hands as I held my cup of cold tea. When I finally heard the front door open, I saw the look in his eyes and my heart broke all over again. He looked lost, hollow, like someone had taken his spirit and crushed it into dust. "Mom," he said softly, his voice raw, "I went to a hotel. I couldn't stay here." I nodded, not trusting my voice to hold steady. He walked to the sofa and sank into it, burying his face in his hands. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be all right. But there are moments when words are too small to carry the weight of pain. I sat beside him silently, my hand resting gently on his shoulder. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Why would she do this?" I didn't answer because I knew there was no answer that could ease that kind of betrayal. He turned to me, tears streaking his face. "You were right," he said, his voice trembling. "I should have listened. I should have seen it." I shook my head. "No, son. You saw what love wanted you to see. There's no shame in that." He nodded slowly, looking away. Hours passed before he finally stood up and said, "I can't stay here, Mom. I can't even look at her." I wanted to ask where he would go, but I knew he didn't have an answer. He packed a small bag and left, his steps heavy, his shoulders slumped. As the door closed, I felt an emptiness that words cannot describe. I thought I would feel relief that the truth had finally been revealed, but all I felt was sorrow. I had protected him, yes, but in doing so, I had shattered the home he had built. When Claire came out of the bedroom later that morning, her eyes were red, but her expression was cold. She didn't cry like a woman who regretted her mistakes. She looked like someone calculating her next move. "I hope you're proud," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "You've ruined everything." I stared at her shocked. "Ruined everything?" I repeated. "You did that yourself." She laughed bitterly. "Do you really think he'll come back to you now? You think he'll thank you for this? You've just made him lose everything he cared about." Her words were poison, each one carefully meant to hurt. I stood tall, refusing to let her see the tremor in my heart. "The truth had to come out," I said softly, "no matter how painful." She walked closer, her face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this, Margaret," she hissed. "You don't know what you've started." And then she walked out, slamming the door behind her so hard that the picture frame on the wall fell and shattered. I stood there in the silence, the echo of that slam still ringing in my ears, feeling both victorious and defeated at the same time. Days turned into weeks, and my son stayed away, barely calling. I knew he needed time, but the silence between us grew heavy. One afternoon, I went to visit him at his apartment, but he didn't open the door. When I called, he answered softly, saying he needed space, but he couldn't face anyone right now. His voice sounded distant, like he was slipping further away. I came home feeling like the world I once held together had started falling apart in pieces I couldn't gather. The neighbors whispered, the family members called asking what had happened, and I found myself repeating the same words again and again. It was complicated, it was painful, it would pass. But inside, I wasn't sure. Claire didn't return, at least not right away, but one evening, a letter arrived addressed to my son. I couldn't help but notice the handwriting. I placed it on the table and stepped back, unsure whether to touch it or burn it. When he finally visited a few days later, I told him about it. He stared at the envelope for a long moment before finally opening it. His hands trembled as he read the words inside. I couldn't see what it said, but when he finished, he sat in silence, his face pale. "She wants to meet," he said finally. My heart clenched. "Are you going?" He hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me wants answers, the other part wants to forget she ever existed." I wanted to tell him not to go, that nothing good would come from reopening that wound, but I also knew he needed closure. So I said nothing. The next day, he left to meet her. I waited by the phone, pacing, every minute stretching into hours. When he returned that night, his face was blank, unreadable. "How was it?" I asked softly. He looked at me with eyes that had aged years in a day. "She said she made a mistake," he whispered. "She begged for another chance." My chest tightened. "And what did you say?" He looked away, his voice barely audible. I told her I needed time. I wanted to be angry, to tell him she didn't deserve even a second of his thought. But when I saw the pain in his eyes, I stayed quiet. Love doesn't vanish overnight, and forgiveness is never simple. As the days passed, he grew distant, quieter, as if lost between love and betrayal. I tried to be there for him, but sometimes love can only stand at the edge of someone's grief, helpless. Then one evening, just as I was about to sleep, I heard the front door open. He walked in, his face tired but calm. "Mom," he said softly, "she's moving back." The words hit me like ice water. "What?" I whispered. "After everything?" He nodded. "She says she wants to make it right, and I want to believe her." I stared at him in disbelief, my heart pounding. "Son, you saw what she did." He sighed. "I know, but people make mistakes. Maybe I can forgive her. Maybe we can start over." I wanted to scream, to shake him, to tell him he was walking back into the fire. But I couldn't. Instead, I sat in silence, my eyes burning with tears I refused to shed. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. The war wasn't over. It was only changing shape. When Claire returned to the house, it felt like the walls themselves tightened, as if the air had lost its warmth and the home I once knew had been replaced by a stage for silent battles. She walked in with that same practiced smile, a bouquet of flowers in her hand, pretending to be remorseful, pretending to have changed. My son hugged her cautiously, and I stood a few steps away, watching, my heart sinking deeper with every second. I wanted to believe that people could change, but there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of satisfaction, a coldness that no apology could hide. "I'm happy you're home," I said softly, forcing the words out because I didn't want to create another storm. "Thank you, Mom," she replied, her tone smooth but her eyes never meeting mine. For the first few days, she behaved perfectly. She cooked, she cleaned, she laughed at my son's jokes, and she even asked me if I wanted tea. It was all too perfect, too polished, and I knew better than to trust peace that came so easily after destruction. My son seemed happier, lighter even, as if hope had returned to his heart. But beneath that calm surface, I could feel something shifting again, something dark. Slowly, subtly, she began to undo everything I had repaired between my son and me. It started small. "Mom forgot to add salt," she would say with a gentle laugh during dinner, or "Mom must have misplaced it again," when something went missing. At first, my son didn't notice. But over time, those tiny remarks began to plant quiet doubts in his mind. I saw it in his eyes, the way he started second-guessing me, the way he hesitated when I spoke. Then she began twisting stories. One evening, she told him I had accused her of stealing jewelry, something I never said. Why would she say that? My son asked me, confused. "I didn't," I insisted, my voice trembling. "You have to believe me." But he only sighed and said, "Mom, please don't start again." That hurt more than anything. I could handle her cruelty, but hearing those words from my son, my own flesh and blood felt like a knife sliding slowly into my heart. Claire knew exactly what she was doing. Every lie she told was a careful seed planted in moments when he was tired, when his guard was down, when he was too weary to think. And she watered those seeds with her tears, her soft apologies, her perfect timing. Within weeks, the distance between me and my son grew wider. He started avoiding long conversations with me, spending more time with her, and whenever I tried to speak privately, she would appear out of nowhere, interrupting with that same fake sweetness. The final blow came one evening when I overheard them arguing in the living room. My son's voice was raised, and I caught fragments of his words. "She's my mother. Stop twisting everything. You promised to change." I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. Then I heard her sobbing, saying, "I'm trying, but she hates me. I can feel it. She looks at me like I don't belong here." He softened immediately, just like she knew he would, and said, No, she doesn't hate you. She's just old-fashioned. Old-fashioned. That's what I had become in his eyes. Not a mother, not a protector, just a relic of the past standing in the way of his peace. I walked quietly back to my room, tears streaming silently down my face. The next morning, I woke early to make breakfast like I used to, hoping to bring back a piece of our old life. When they came downstairs, the smell of pancakes filled the air, but Claire frowned immediately. "Oh," she said softly, "I thought we agreed I'd handle the kitchen." My son looked at me uncertainly. "Mom, maybe," he began, but I cut him off, smiling weakly. "Of course, dear. I just wanted to make you both something nice." Claire smiled, a small victorious smile she tried to hide, and said, "You shouldn't have sat there without permission either. That's my spot." I froze, her words echoing through me like the first day she had thrown those plates. I looked at her, remembering every insult, every cruel whisper, every lie. My son said nothing. He just looked down, pretending not to notice. In that moment, I realized she had won again, not because she was right, but because she had managed to turn silence into her weapon. Later that day, I sat alone in my room, staring at the family photo on my nightstand, the one taken before all of this, before the lies and betrayals. I thought about leaving, about packing my things and walking out quietly. But then I remembered my husband's voice in my memories, telling me that love isn't about running from pain. It's about standing through it with dignity. So I stayed, not because I was weak, but because I refused to let her erase me completely. But inside, something had changed. I no longer hoped for peace. I no longer waited for kindness. What I wanted now was balance, a reckoning that didn't come from rage but from truth. I knew one day her mask would slip again, and when it did, I would be there, silent but unbroken, ready to show her that the woman she tried to destroy was still standing. The day that truth began to crawl back into the light started like any other, quiet, fragile, and heavy with the weight of unspoken words. I woke up early as usual, the house still wrapped in silence, and I heard their voices faintly coming from the kitchen. I didn't mean to listen, but years of pain had made my ears sharp to the sound of tension. My son's voice was low but firm, something I hadn't heard in months. "Claire, stop lying to me," he said, and in that instant my heart stopped. I moved closer, careful not to make a sound, and heard her reply, trembling but defensive. "I didn't lie. Your mother is turning you against me." He cut her off, his voice rising now. "Enough, Claire. I found the receipts, the messages, everything. You've been talking to your ex this whole time, telling him how much you hate living here, how you pretend just to keep the house." There was silence, the kind that feels alive, the kind that fills every corner of a room with dread. Then I heard her break down, her tears mixed with excuses. "I didn't mean it. I just needed someone to talk to," she sobbed. But this time her voice had lost its magic, its manipulation. My son didn't comfort her. He didn't say a word. He walked past her, his footsteps echoing through the hallway until he stood outside my door. For a moment, he didn't knock, just stood there, breathing heavily, as if trying to find the right words. When he finally pushed the door open, his eyes were red, filled with regret and exhaustion. "Mom," he said softly, his voice breaking, "you were right. I didn't move. I didn't cry." I just looked at him, the boy I had raised, the man who had once believed a stranger's lies over my truth. "It doesn't matter anymore," I whispered, but he shook his head fiercely. "It does. I hurt you, I doubted you, and I let her poison this house. I can't take that back, but I can make it right." I saw the truth in his eyes this time, the kind of truth that only pain carves out of someone's soul. That afternoon, Claire packed her things. There were no screams, no plates breaking, no final scene of rage. She just stood there in the living room, her eyes swollen, her face pale. "I didn't want it to end like this," she said to me quietly. I looked at her and replied, "It never had to start this way." She lowered her gaze, grabbed her bag, and left. The sound of the door closing behind her was like the end of a long, bitter winter. My son sat beside me on the couch, his hands trembling slightly. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence that once hurt now felt calm, like the house was finally breathing again. Later that evening, I made him tea, the same way I used to when he was little, and we sat together watching the sun fade through the curtains. He looked at me and said, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn," I said softly. "It's something you give when you want peace." He nodded, his eyes glistening, and for the first time in a long while, I saw my son again, not the man trapped in someone else's shadow, but the kind-hearted boy I had raised. Days turned into weeks, and the house slowly healed. The laughter came back, the warmth returned, and the walls no longer echoed with tension. Sometimes I'd find him standing in the garden, looking at the flowers, lost in thought, and I'd know he was still carrying guilt. But I never reminded him of it. I didn't need to. The truth had already done its work. Months later, he told me he wanted to sell the house and start fresh somewhere new. "I want to build a home with peace, Mom," he said. I smiled and agreed, because I knew that true revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's quiet, patient, and born from endurance. It's when the storm passes and you're still standing. The day we left the house, I took one last look around. The walls that had seen my pain now seemed softer somehow, as if they too had forgiven. I touched the kitchen counter where the first fight had begun and whispered a silent goodbye. As we drove away, I didn't look back. My heart was lighter, my spirit unbroken, and though life had tested me in ways I never imagined, I had learned one simple truth: no matter how deep betrayal cuts, the strength of a mother's love can never be destroyed. And that, I realized, was the real justice, the kind that doesn't need witnesses, only peace.